2025 is slated to be a big year for TaikonoTatsujin. The latest installment in the series, Rhythm Festival, is finally getting released on Steam this November, and will apparently support high frame rate, which is a major upgrade from previous games in my opinion. Also in November, Bandai Namco will finally start distributing new Taiko cabinets directly to the US. Probably the most exciting Taiko news we've gotten in years. While I truly believe that going to the arcade is the best way to experience TaikonoTatsujin, nothing beats the convenience of playing at home. Not to mention that many people in the US, myself included, live hours away from the nearest Taiko cabinet. Hopefully Bandai's new venture will help make Taiko way more accessible for us, but regardless, I think there will always be a need for a reliable home version. And to play the home version, obviously you gotta get yourself a drum. So in this video, I'll be giving you my thoughts on the newest drum to hit the market, the TDC10 by Rhythmagica. I've been using this drum for a few weeks now, and while it's not perfect, I do think it's a great investment for players really at any skill level. A lot of players have been hyping up this drum, and to understand why, you kind of need to know about the other drum options that we've had to work with over the years. I'm going to take a quick detour to catch you guys up to speed, but if you prefer to skip straight to the review, feel free to do so. So for a long time, if you wanted to buy a decent drum, your options were pretty limited. Starting with the release of Drum & Fun on the Switch, all the way back in 2018, we got the HORI controller, which today goes for about $70 on Amazon. This is the drum I've been using since I first got into Taiko, and while it's a decent choice for beginners, anyone who's used it for a while knows just how frustrating it can be sometimes. I mean, dropped inputs, low sensitivity, small form factor, it's incredibly lightweight. These are all things you do not want in a Taiko controller. Of course, you can mod the drum to address some of these issues, but that comes with its own set of problems. In my case, I installed this wooden insert that I bought from Etsy, and while it did noticeably increase the sensitivity for Dawn notes, the Con notes still required a lot of force to register. This felt really awkward and kind of defeats the point of modding to begin with. So I tried my best to mod the Ka sensors, and even though I was careful, I somehow managed to damage the sensors to the point that Con notes would just barely register. And long story short, I had to buy a new HORI controller, which honestly felt like a huge waste of money. I've seen similar stories all over, like Amazon reviews, Reddit, you name it. This drum is just not great. So, what other options do you have? Well, on the cheaper side, you can find a bunch of knockoff drums on AliExpress, with the most popular being this one by a company called IINE. I've seen pretty mixed reviews for this drum, with some claiming that it's a much better purchase than the HORI one, while others reporting serious issues with input lag. Tokaku actually posted a full review of this drum on her channel a few years back, and she pretty much argued that you might as well just buy the HORI drum since they have a similar price anyway. Now, since then, I have found some people saying that newer versions of the product are a lot better, but I can't really confirm that myself. If you're interested in this one, I guess, just buy at your own risk. But what about more expensive drums? Well, there are a few you can choose from. You have the Taiko Force, which is made by a Chinese company called Yuancon, that also makes controllers for other rhythm games like Sound Voltex, Groove Coaster, and even Mai Mai. The Taiko Force was like the original really good drum you could get. It's well known, it's well regarded, and there are plenty of reviews you can find out there for it. Later on, the Jong Taiko controller was released. Most people consider this drum to be similar to the Taiko Force, but with some noticeable differences that make it feel more comparable to an arcade drum. As far as I can tell, all of these drums are being made by a single guy, Jong, who is based in Taiwan. He also sells these high-quality Maibachi that I strongly recommend. Now, both the Taiko Force and the Jong Taiko are great products, but let's address the elephant in the room. They are expensive. To get it shipped to the US, you pay $566 for the Taiko Force and a whopping $630 for the Jong Taiko. Just like with any other hobby, if you're really serious about Taiko, it definitely makes sense to invest more money into something like this. But for new players, it's just a really hard product to recommend. And even for more experienced players, it's not something a lot of people can just afford right now, myself included. I should also mention that there's a third drum called the Taikoler by Gammo 2 that came out a little over a year ago. It's the cheapest option of the three, coming in at $431 shipped to the US. A lot of people seem to think that this drum is a really good deal. Honestly, I was tempted to pick one up, but that price tag is still a little rough. I mean, it's basically the same price as a PS5. So to summarize, you have cheap drums like the HORI and IINE that don't work well and feel like a waste of money, and you have the expensive drums that are great but sadly unaffordable to a lot of people. For the longest time, these were the only options you had to work with. But that finally changed when last October, a familiar face, none other than IINE, put out a controller called the Pro Max Drum for under $200. I couldn't find a ton of reviews for this one, but there is one video by a small channel called JazzT22 that you should definitely check out. From what I can gather, this drum is a genuinely good option that works well. Alright, I know that's a lot to keep track of, but the point I'm trying to make is that starting with the release of the Taikoler, decent drums have been getting cheaper and cheaper, which is a really great thing for the Taiko community. And that finally brings us to the TDC10, which is yet another drum following the same trend. It's from a new company based in Singapore called Rhythmagica. It actually began as a Kickstarter campaign back in March of this year, and now you can just buy it directly on Amazon, which I did. And it's $145, it's even cheaper than the Pro Max drum. The question is it any good? Let's find out. Okay, so getting started with the unboxing, you can see there's a few bullet points over here. It claims that the TDC10 has high elasticity, which I'm very interested in testing out. It has adjustable sensitivity, which is pretty impressive for a drum at this price point. There's an app you can download on your phone, which we'll take a look at later. And finally, it claims to be compatible with the Switch, PS4, and PC. I guess the platform compatibility is controlled on the app, and the developer seems to be updating the app pretty frequently, so I would expect that it'll be compatible with pretty much any version of Taiko going forward. So opening up the box here, you can see that everything comes inside this black case. The case is pretty nice, although I honestly can't think of a situation where I would need to carry a Taiko drum around, but it's nice to have anyway. We've got some orange grips for the bachi. These seem pretty much identical to the grips that you can also buy from Jong's website, and I'll show you how to put them on later. We've got the drum head itself, and one thing I noticed is that the color on the back seems a little bit brighter than what you could see on the Amazon listing, but obviously this isn't really a problem, it's just an aesthetic thing. Everything else is underneath this piece of felt. So we've got the drum stand that has the Rhythmagica logo on the side. We're gonna assemble these in just a second. We've also got the bachi, and honestly I was surprised by how light these felt. Again, there's the Rhythmagica logo on the side. There's also this little star, which I assume is to help you align the grip whenever you're wrapping it around the bachi. And finally, we just have a USB cable, which is not very interesting. Taking a quick look at the manual here, it seems pretty detailed. I'm honestly impressed by all the documentation that comes with this thing. Now, taking a look at the face of the drum, it seems to be made of a much higher quality material than the HORI controller. On the back, we've got a couple USB ports. Apparently, you need to use a different port depending on which system you're connecting to. It's all laid out in the manual. I also noticed that there are these screw holes on the back. These are for mounting the drum directly onto a VISA mount, which is a really cool feature. I'll probably try doing that myself at some point. There are these nubs going around the drum. I guess these are mostly for aesthetics, but it's also going to help us out when we're trying to align the drum on the stand. Also, there's a little pattern going around the circumference of the drum. I would assume these will help us distinguish between dan notes and ka notes while we're playing. So first impression of the drum face is that it feels really bouncy with these light sticks. It also sounds much more pleasant than the HORI drum, and don't worry, we'll do a full sound comparison later in the video. Next up, we need to assemble the stand. It comes with this little bolt that's just taped onto the back. As you can see, the stand has this sort of hinge design, so we literally just line up the hinge, drop the bolt in here, and we're good to go. And then to place the drum on the stand, we're just gonna align it with the two little nubs on the bottom, as you can see here. And the key thing is that you wanna have the USB ports facing directly to the right of the drum, just like this. Okay, so finally we're gonna wrap the bachi with the grip. I might be outing myself as a 2000s kid here, but does this remind anyone else of Fruit by the Foot? No? Okay. So we're just gonna carefully peel off this little film on the back. So you wanna press that side up against the bachi at a small angle, and then start rolling it. Now, the angle that you roll at is gonna determine how far up the grip will go. And this is really your own personal preference, but one thing you can do is try aiming for the little star. And finally, we peel off this little tape and use the adhesive to attach the grip. For me, I found that it didn't really want to stay attached, and so if you run into this problem, just use like some electrical tape and wrap it around the end of the grip. Super easy. Alright, now before we test this thing out, let's open up that app really quickly and see what kind of settings we have. The app is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just give a really quick overview. You can install it directly from either the App Store or Google Play Store. Before opening the app, plug your drum into whatever system you're playing on, and make sure you're using the correct USB port. In my case, I'll be playing on the Switch, so I'll use port A. The app connects to the drum via Bluetooth, and you'll know you're connected once you see the 3 lines on the bottom left. The first time you connect, you'll need to update the drum's firmware. To do that, just click Settings, then scroll all the way down and click on the build number. You should get a pop-up with some details about the firmware version. I'm recording this in September 2024, and right now the latest update is version 2.29. Just click Confirm and let the app do its thing. Once it's installed, you'll need to wait a little bit longer for the drum to reboot. In my case, the app actually got stuck on this step, and I couldn't reconnect after the firmware update. The only solution I found was to disconnect the drum from my Switch, force stop the app in my phone's settings, reconnect the drum, and then restart the app, and it finally worked. At this point, the app should automatically detect which system you're connected to, but if it doesn't, just open the settings, click Game Station, and select your console. While we're here, let's take a look at the settings. The drum has 2 different sensitivity settings, one for when you're navigating menus and another for when you're actually playing. I like to keep the navigation sensitivity on the highest setting, but it doesn't matter that much. The drum itself doesn't have physical buttons, so they added arcade mode, which allows you to navigate menus in-game using the drum sensors. The Ka notes map to left and right, while the Dan notes both map to A. The only downside is that there's no B button, so you can't back out of a menu without using another controller. I think the easiest fix would be to map only the right Dan to A and map the left Dan to B. If you guys at Rhythmagica happen to see this video, it would be great if you could add that in a future update. Next up, we have the threshold, which is pretty much the most important setting. It determines the drum sensitivity while you're playing songs. The smaller the threshold, the more sensitive the drum will be, and the less force it will require to activate notes. The value ranges from 0 to 99, and the default setting seems to be 5. I found this to be a little too sensitive for my taste and eventually settled on 10. You'll have to play around with different settings to figure out which one works best for you. Also, if you find that a certain note feels less sensitive than others, you can make fine-tuned adjustments by increasing the signal for each note separately. I found that this wasn't really necessary, but it's a good feature to have nonetheless. Finally, there's the big note setting. This one requires a little more explanation, and I'll save that for later in the review. Alright, after choosing your settings, click the save icon in the top right, and once you get this pop-up message, you should be good to go. You can either close out of the app or keep it open and use it as a digital controller. When I'm playing, I actually prefer to use my Joy-Cons instead of the app controller, so let me show you how to do that real quick. The drum is recognized by the Switch as a Pro controller, so with both the drums and the Joy-Cons connected, make sure that the Pro controller is set to player 1. Then, on the startup screen for Rhythm Festival, instead of pressing L+R on the Joy-Cons, you just hit the drum face. If you did that correctly, the drum should be detected as an active controller. Alright guys, so switching over to my POV, I've got my TDC10 on the left and my old HORI drum on the right. Let's start off with a basic sound comparison. So you can see I've got 4 sets of bachi laid out here, and we're going to start with everyone's favorite, the HORI bachi. So here's the TDC10 and the HORI. Now moving on to the Rhythmagica bachi, these are actually a little bit lighter than the HORI bachi, surprisingly. Definitely the lightest set of bachi that I own. First the TDC10, and then the HORI. Moving on here, I've got this pair of bachi that I purchased from the arcade. They're not quite as heavy as the Jong bachi, but they are definitely heavier than these 2 pairs. All right, the TDC10. And now the HORI. And finally, we have the bachi from Jong's shop. These are a little bit on the heavier side. First up, the TDC10. And the HORI. So as you guys can see, it's honestly a night and day difference between the TDC10 and the HORI drum in terms of sound. Okay, so here comes a part of the review where I try my best to communicate how it feels to play on this drum. Having played for a while on the HORI drum, and also having played for a little bit on an arcade cabinet, what I would say is that the TDC10 falls right in the middle somewhere. It's definitely not going to be as arcade accurate as something like the Jong, but it is pretty elastic. And that elasticity is something that I haven't felt since playing on an arcade cabinet. So first up, let me show you guys roughly where the sensors are on this drum. So to demonstrate that, I'm just going to give it a few hits, and you can see which note is being registered on the screen. So when you're hitting Don notes, you want to aim for roughly this area. Let me show you what I mean. If you hit down here, they're not going to register. But if you go up a little bit, there we go. You can actually see there's a little pattern etched into the edge of the drum. And right when you hit that pattern is when ka notes start registering. All right, now I'm gonna play a few basic patterns for you guys. Let's start off with some basic 3-note patterns. Now onto some 5-note patterns. And now some basic streams. It can also do double strokes, although I'm not the best at this technique and I'm still kind of learning. Alright, finally, let's talk about everyone's favorite, rolling. Now, the number of notes you'll be able to get off of a roll depends very heavily on how you set the sensitivity in the app. For me, I've got the sensitivity set at 10 right now, and I found that I can usually get anywhere from 3 to 5 notes off of a single roll. One critique I do have of this drum is that there's something weird going on with big notes, meaning when you hit both the left and right sensors at the same time. Normally they should register simultaneously, but what I found is that it usually registers one or the other.
If you remember that big note setting in the app, I tried adjusting that, but it still felt kind of off.
To be honest, I don't think that big notes are that important when you're playing Taiko. Especially when you're just trying to master like patterns and techniques and whatnot. My rolling style is a little bit different from other players. Instead of throwing down both sticks at once, I usually prefer to alternate anyway. And of course with the TDC10, the whole big note issue doesn't really come into play there, so I can still get a lot of notes off of a roll.
Okay, so wrapping things up here, I was honestly so impressed by this drum. It has a lot of features that I really wouldn't expect for something priced under $150. With the mobile app, you can fine-tune the drum settings to fit your exact playstyle. Sounds way better than the HORI, and feels way better than the HORI. Later this year, Bandai is going to be releasing a new HORI drum to coincide with a new version of Rhythm Festival, and it'll be retailing for around $100. When you consider that the TDC10 is only $50 more, it becomes really hard to justify buying a new HORI drum going forward. Now, if you already own a HORI drum and you are successfully able to mod it, I don't think it's totally necessary to buy this drum. I would instead suggest saving your money towards something like a Taikoler or a Jong Taiko. That being said, if you're a beginner and you don't already own a drum, this might just be the best option on the market. Of course, just like any other drum, the TDC10 isn't perfect. The one major complaint I have is that I really do wish the drum were a little bit larger. It's 25 centimeters in diameter, making it pretty much comparable to the HORI drum. Meanwhile, the arcade-style controllers are usually around 45 centimeters in diameter. It just means that if you practice at home on the TDC10, transferring those skills to the arcade cabinet will take a little bit more effort. If the drum size really matters to you, maybe you could look into something like the Pro Max drum that has a diameter of 35 centimeters. But keep in mind that it is more expensive, retailing around $200. But yeah guys, just to summarize, I'm really stoked about this drum. I love it, it feels great to play on, and I'm super happy that I made the investment. Honestly, this drum makes me feel really excited for the future of Taiko. I think it'll give new players the opportunity to grow their skills faster than they could before. And you know, I really can't wait to see what the next year has in store for us Taiko fans.